The Marvelous Dragon Balls. A teenager finds himself in the Marvel world with the Dragon Balls, and has to find a way to survive. Say your wish. Any wish can be granted, but you only get one. Any wish could be granted. Of course. Great. Shenron, please get me out of the Marvel world, return me to my original world. I'm sorry, I can't do that. What? What were you bragging about then, saying you can grant any wish? Your body is from this world, therefore. Okay, then give me the power of a Super Saiyan. I want be able to beat Thor and Hulk, surpass Captain America and Iron Man. I'm sorry, I can't do that. Worthless dragon. What can you do? I can. Chapter 1. Summoning Shenron. Earth 199,999, Marvel Cinematic Universe, 2008, USA, New York City, Manhattan Island, Clinton District. Clinton is often referred to as the Hell Kitchen. On a commercial street near Clinton Park, an 18-year-old Asian teenager hurried into the alley, took a bunch of keys from his jacket pocket and opened the back door of a small shop. This ordinary, plain Asian boy had a golden tattoo on the back of his right hand. The tattoo pattern was that of 5 pointed stars, one big, and 4 more small ones on its side, just like the 5-star red flag of China. After entering the store, the probably Chinese boy quickly locked the back door and turned, and went straight to the basement of the store. After the boy locked the door of the basement as well, he quickly walked to the center of the basement, unloaded his backpack, and took out 6 apple-sized crystal balls out of it. He placed the precious balls on the floor, as carefully as if his life hanged on not jeopardizing them. On a closer look, all 6 transparent balls were of the same size, but they were still different. They mainly differed in the number of 5-pointed stars inside them. The number ranged from 1 to 7, with only the 5 stars ball missing. After placing the crystal ball, the teenager opened his arms with excitement and shouted in his mouth, "Come on, Shenron. Make my wish come true." A breeze blew inside, but nothing happened. He was stunned for and then put his head between his palm, and couched down. He put his right hand with the 5 stars tattoo upon it and placed with the dragon balls and repeated, "Come on, Shenron. Make my wish come true." This time, as soon as his voice fell, the electric light on the top of his head suddenly started flickering. After a few times, it finally extinguished completely, and the entire basement fell into darkness. Next, in the darkness, 5 bright lights suddenly shined from the floor. He saw the 6 balls and his tattoo shining. The tattoo shined and a 7th ball separated to merge with the other 6, forming a serpentine shiny beast. The glowing beast looked alive, long like massive serpent, with horns like deer, scales like a fish, claw like a phoenix, and palms like that of a tiger. It was the totem animal of China, a dragon. So small. The teenager bit his lips and faced the legendary beast. With disgust he said to himself, "Is it only a few meters long? In Dragon Ball, it was massive." Shenron ignored the young man's muttering hovering in mid-air, and with its majestic head high, it barely moved mouth, saying in a mechanical tone, "Say your wish. Any wish can be granted, but you only get one." The young man's spirit was lifted and he raised his head with hope, "Any wish can be achieved." Of course. Great. The young man clenched his fists and looked with excitement on his face, "Shenron, please send me back to my original world." "I'm sorry, I can't do it." The young man was stunned, it took his a while to recover from the shock. Then his rage exploded, "What? What were you bragging about then, saying you can grant any wish? This body of yours belongs to the Marvel world. I can't send it away. Your soul, however, belongs to your past world. I can send that back." Hearing those words, the young man's eyebrows rose and he regained his high spirit. He renewed his wish, "So, please send my soul back to my original body." "I'm sorry, I can't do it." The young man was filled with great anger, and only one word could escape his life, "Why? In your original world, you are already dead." The teenager was not convinced and said, "What's the problem with that? Isn't resurrection your forte? You've revived so many people in the Dragon Ball world. But you are not from the Dragon Ball world. Only under the cosmic rules of the Dragon Ball world could I revive people." The young man remained silent for a while, and then asked, "So, if you just send my soul back, it will be just occupying a dying body like it did when coming to the Marvel world?" "No. Your soul has been integrated with the 5-star Dragon Ball. If you want your soul back to your world, it would have to be forcibly separated, and severely damaged. Your soul won't be able to occupy any body, it will just fade away with time. The teenager became completely desperate, slammed his hand on his knees, and muttered hopelessly, I can't go back, I really can't go back. Dad! Mom! Your son has disobeyed you! He screamed on the ground and cried out loud. His original name was Gurun. He was not from this world, not even from the world of Dragon Ball. To him, they were just world from film and animation. He never thought that one day, he would be a soul bringing the Dragon Balls to the Marvel Universe. Gurun was a native Chinese. After crossing over, his soul floated for a while before landing on body of a dying young man. Fortunately, the new body was also that of a Chinese. At first, he knew nothing about it. But after a while, he regained only a few memories from the original owner who had sudden death, and adapted quickly to his new identity. His name was Saint Li, translator note, that's hopeful naming from his parents XD. Saint Li was second-generation Chinese-American, whose parents were killed in an air crash, leaving him with a flat and a small Chinese restaurant in New York. At first, because of the amount of information he had gathered, he thought he was still in his original world, just a few years later perhaps. That lasted until he saw talking about the late hero, Captain America, and news about Tony Stark on TV. He was shocked to find out that there were heroes and villains all over this world, the world of Marvel. Living in this world, and being in America, was dangerous enough. But no, he had to be in New York. New York! How many tragedies have occurred in this city that he knew from the Marvel story? Hulk vs. Abomination, Captain America vs. Winter Soldier, Shield vs. Hydra, Avengers vs. Alien Army in the Battle of New York, Defenders League battles, and so on, they were countless. Chapter 2. The Life Knowledge of Son Goku. Knowing that he was bound to remain in the Marvel Universe, the young man who was now Saint Li accidentally discovered the 5-star tattoo on his hand. It reminded him that 7 Dragon Balls crossed over along with his soul to the Marvel world. According to legend, as long as 7 Dragon Balls are gathered together, any wish can be realized. As he crossed over to the world, his soul merged with the 5-star Dragon Ball. He thought that perhaps, he had to only gather 6, and that would give him the ability to summon Shenron, relying on the connection between all Dragon Balls. It took him over 2 weeks to find the remaining 6 that were scattered nearby, and he finally summoned the dragon. However, it turned out that his wishes were too naive. In the center of the basement, Saint Li fell to the ground at thought that he was separated forever from his parents, being forever in separate worlds. He could no longer ever see them, and could only mourn at that thought. At this time, Shenron, which was completely forgotten, once again said, "Say your wish. Any wish can be granted, but you have only one." He's still at it. Disappointed by hearing any wish can be granted again, rage took over Saint Li, and he threw his fist furiously saying, "Go to hell, you're full of it, you lying dragon." The mini Shenron looked like the real thing, but his was only a hologram, a body of energy. Saint Li's fist went right through him, and his momentum got him off balance, almost making him trip to the ground. Seeing this, Shenron did not react, only saying, "Say your wishes. Any wish can be granted, but you have only one." Hearing that, Saint Li turned around, hitting his forehead violently, and grinding his teeth. As violence was futile, he could only coldly say, "Shut up. I want to think. Say your wishes. Any wish can be granted, but you have only one." He finally regained his calm, and no longer paid attention to Shenron's automatic answer, and began to seriously think for wishes. After all, his life could only go on. Living in the Marvel world, nothing could prove more important than getting a life-saving ability. Gaining an amazing power should be his first choice. He thought for so long, then said, "Shenron, please grant me the power of becoming a Super Saiyan." "I'm sorry, I cannot do that." Although he wasn't hoping for much from the get-go, Saint Li could only scream, "Useless dragon, what can you actually do?" In the Dragon Ball world, strength can only be gained through practice, and can never be obtained out of thin air. "I'm a creature from that world, I have to abide by that rule. I can however give you the body constitution of a Saiyan without changing your outer shape." This was good for Saint. After all, this way he wouldn't have a tail, and wouldn't have to worry about becoming a mindless giant ape when looking at the full moon. The Saiyan have bottomless potential, and can get so strong so fast. Stronger, faster, no need for too much practice, having such a body would be like having a cheat. However, thinking of this, the ability to change his constitution without changing his shape, Saint's eye became bright and he said, "Please give me the physique of Majin Buu." Having the constitution Majin Buu, the final boss in DBZ, he would have the ability to gain any ability he wished for. As long as he had one cell left in his body, he could survive, he could even survive in space. With the transformation ability, he could literally eat his way through the Marvel world, and save Earth from destruction. However, "I'm sorry, I can't do that." Saint felt sick to his stomach by now, but was too easy to ask why. He immediately lowered the bar. So, perfect cell. Great ability, survivability in space and as long as his core remains, etc. "I'm sorry, I can't do that." Helplessly, he lowered the bar even further. Frieza. Transformation, survivability in space and as long as his head remains, etc. "I'm sorry, I can't do that." Saint scratched his head in pain, and then thought of what enemy would be below that. He could only think of Piccolo. While this character had great regeneration ability, his evolution potential was even lower than that of a Saiyan. Saint seriously thought of the matter, and then changed the direction of his questions. "If I want to acquire someone's lifelong knowledge, would that be possible?" "That would be very simple." Because of Shenron's track record with him, Saint sneered, already guessing that this was another vain claim. "Dragon, please give me all the knowledge that Son Goku had learned throughout his life." "I'm sorry, I can't do that," Saint thought that what he was going to hear. Unexpectedly, Shenron nodded, "Your wish is fulfilled." Saint fell to his knees in surprise, and the dragon immediately divided into 7 streams, one of which went into Saint's right hand, and the others scattered and disappeared beyond the walls of the basement. After granting a wish, Shenron would once again get divided into 7 stone balls that get scattered all over the world, absorbing energy until they become Dragon Balls again. "Alright. Wait, where's the good knowledge?" Saint blinked, not feeling any change at all. He became suspicious thinking, "Did I just really not gain anything?" He tried to close his eyes and meditate. Suddenly, he felt a difference. He could sense Ki. Ki, the life energy contained within all living objects. If could be described as the foundation of all power in the Dragon Ball world. Anything from daily practicing to the destruction of planets relied on Ki. Obviously, after gaining Goku's knowledge, he was able to use Ki sense. On top of that, he also gained Goku's unrivaled rich combat experience. Of course, he could only use his fists and legs to imitate Goku's techniques. With his current power level of probably no more than 5, he cannot use the Kamehameha, flight, or instant transmission. Without practicing day in and day out, he wouldn't even be able to use the simplest of the Kame-style techniques. Saint opened his eyes and then quickly closed them again while sighing. It was because he looked at the tattoo on his hand and saw that it turned grey. He couldn't help but think, that dragon was useless. But I can still gain a lot from it. I don't know when, but there will be a time when I can make a wish again. Chapter 3. The Iron Fist, Danny Rand. Because of the fusion of his soul with the 5-star Dragon Ball, and because of his past knowledge, Saint speculated that in the Marvel world, the recovery time of the Dragon Balls should be directly proportional to the speed of their absorption of energy. It was unlike the Dragon Ball world, where it was fixed to being 1 year. That meant that, if they would get a good energy supplement, they would soon be recovered. However, it also meant that if they did not get energy, they would never return to their initial state. Fortunately, the 5-star Dragon Ball was in his hands. Even if the 6 other Dragon Ball that were scattered across the globe were not in rich energy places, he could always actively seek energy for his own Dragon Ball to absorb. After all Dragon Balls are one entity that's divided, and whatever energy he could obtain would automatically be divided equally between them, making them all active at the same time. However, it was still too early for him to think about any of this. For now, his priority was to find money. In the period that Saint spent in the Marvel world, all he could think about was finding the Dragon Balls. Not only did he not bother to open the restaurant, he also traded large sums of the money that the previous owner of his body possessed for the Dragon Balls that were found by others before him. Thinking that he would soon return to his past world, he did not even consider the idea of saving money. His deposit had already been burnt out, and he didn't have enough money to eat. I want to rob a bank. He shook his head and went out of the basement. Whatever words he just said were just out of frustration. Yes, he did have the fighting experience of Goku. But with his current fighting power, he would be one shot by live ammunition in minutes even if he fought his way in. After thoroughly rummaging through the boxes and cabinets in the store on the first floor and his place in the second floor, he managed to find a total of $135. With that, along with whatever was left in his pocket, he had a total of $242 left. Looking at the closed store door, he began to think, should he reopen? The problem was that this was a Chinese restaurant, meaning that it had great competition already. After over half a month closing it with no apparent reason, he should have great trouble getting customers. I will practice it for a few days, I am too weak now. He shook his head, knowing what was about to come. He was in 2008, news of the raging Hulk weren't all over the TV just yet. Thor was still a good prince in Asgard, and Captain America was still encased into the Arctic ice. The entire world seemed to be still calm. But Saint knew all too well, that the super playboy Tony Stark would face the world, announcing he had become the superhero Iron Man. Translator note, Pepper changed Tony's arc reactor on May 4, 2008, the date was recorded when Pepper saw a TV program after the press conference. Although he did not remember the exact time, it was clear to Saint that from that day on, the Marvel world would start facing frequent dangers. Superheroes and supervillains started popping up like mushrooms, and even various aliens came to Earth on several occasions. This left him with only a few months to strengthen himself enough for it to be protected. Obviously, he feared death, so he decided to immediately start practicing. He looked at the direction of the restaurant's kitchen saying to himself, the rice bags are almost full, and there's a lot of meat in the freezer. That should last me around 20 days with ease. After 7 days. As Saint looked at the fully bottomed out rice bag and empty freezer, he said to himself, I'm no Saiyan to eat this much. Why was the food so delicious? After 7 days of practicing, he had already consumed all the food he had. On the other hand, his power level of 5 rose to 10. Being threatened of starving to death, Saint took out his wallet and went with his remaining $242 to buy noodles and ingredients, and then cleaned to restaurant preparing to reopen Lee's Chinese restaurant. This Chinese restaurant inherited by Saint was located at the intersection New York's 10th Avenue and 54th Street in Clinton. While being given the scary name of Hell's Kitchen, the area was actually considered a good location, and the crime rate there was not too high. It was a perfect street for a novice hero, a good spot to level up and fight. At this time, the void in Saint's pockets was beginning to take over his mind. He started having thoughts, if business doesn't go too well, I could get a hood and go rob the wicked rich and help the poor. He could rob a few street gangsters, and then he himself was one of the poor. He quickly shook his head, chased his wicked thoughts away. When everything was ready, he rushed to the door that had been closed for nearly a month, and right before lunchtime, he put a few signs. At the door, one of them spelled, starting today, we'll be serving Kung Fu barbecue. This gimmicky signboard actually brought someone into the store very quickly. Saint turned as he heard the door chimes ring to see a handsome young man with blonde curly hair pushing the door in. Welcome. Saint braced himself, faced his first guest, and summoned out all his inner enthusiasm saying, sit down please, what do you want to eat? I strongly recommend our latest dish, Kung Fu barbecue. What happened next was completely unexpected by Saint. The young man stayed at the door, and while he looked of pure European origins, he said in fluent Mandarin, boss, what would Kung Fu barbecue mean? Is it cooked with ghee or something? Or is just cooked on regular stove? Saint was stunned for a moment, and then answered in Mandarin, you've given me quite the surprise. Your Chinese is very fluent, my guest, and you also know ghee. Haha. With a triumphant laugh, the blonde young man and stretched out his hand saying, hello, I am Danny Rand. I have been living in China for the past 15 years and have only recently returned to New York. I'm Saint Lee, I am very glad to meet you, Mr. Rand. As the two shook hands, Saint was calm on the surface, but his heart was taken by storm. If his assumption is right, the one in front of him should be Daniel Danny Rand, the sole heir of the Rand Group. Not only was he billionaire, he was also the strongest warrior trained carefully by the monks of K'un-Lun, a mystical lost city located in China, becoming the immortal Iron Fist. In the future, he shall become one of the 4 heroes forming the Defenders, Iron Fist. Although it was unlikely that Saint's assumption was false, but out of caution, he decided to confirm his conjecture, quietly sensing the ki of the man in front of him. Indeed, he found that the man had very powerful ki. While different to the ki in the Dragon Ball world, the 2 types of ki had great similarities, just like 2 streams of water flowing out of the same spring. He wasn't wrong, this was definitely the Iron Fist. No wonder he was familiar with ki. It seems that he hadn't left Kunlun before long. At this time, he should be still a foolish rash young man. Chapter 4. The Mystical Kame Style. Boss Lee, you haven't answered my question. Sorry for being so rude, I've been quite surprised. Hearing Danny, Saint apologized, and then nodded acknowledging, yes, I can use ki to cook the barbecue. Danny Rand looked at him with a dubious suspicion. He couldn't keep himself from asking, if you can I see it for myself? Of course you can. Saint gently bowed his head, and pointed to a table in the store, please take seat, I'll make you the dish on your table. How many pounds do you want? Danny sat down, picked up the menu on the table and ordered in the authentic Chinese customs, 2 caddies of beef please, half a caddy of white wine, and a stack of side dishes. All right, coming right up. Saint walked into the kitchen, sliced half a caddy of raw beef, skillfully slicing it into thin slices. He then greased it, sprinkled it with spices, and plated it. He then took out the wine and made the side dishes and walked back with the tray. Danny Rand saw that he didn't bring over any charcoal or mini stove, and couldn't help but ask, Boss Lee, how can you barbecue the meat without fire? Saint smiled as he put the plate of raw meat on the table, and said, Mr. Rand, you should also know about the power of ki. A flame is nothing compared to it. Danny was shocked, and before he could ask further questions, Saint put his right hand over the meat. Just like that, the air beneath his palm started whirling. A soft sizzle started to come out from the dining table. Under the horrified watchful eye of Danny Rand, the slice of meat started curling quickly, and thickening up. A rich aroma spread out, dancing in the air, and tickling his nose. By the time Saint retracted his hand, the raw meat underneath his hands was magically transformed into cooked food. This incredible ability was a rather basic method of Mutant Rashi's Kame style. It was basic external release of ki, simply releasing it from the body, resulting in the production of heat. Wow! Danny felt the heat wave, and he couldn't help but sigh and shout, this is incredible! Please enjoy! Saint had a happy smile on his face. He had been spending the past week practicing ki external release. In his heart, he was very proud, though, for his ki was too weak, he could only use this technique within the range of a few centimeters. Please stay! Danny shouted at Saint, who was about to turn around and leave. He stood up from his chair and solemnly saluted him with his fist against his palm. Obviously, because of his unique skill, Saint had gained his recognition. I'm sorry. I haven't introduced myself properly. Humble Danny Rand, Kunlun's immortal Iron Fist. Kunlun. Even though he had long guessed Danny's identity, Danny pretended to be surprised, and returned the salute, compiling a biography for himself. I have heard a lot of your name from a long time. I the Kame School last disciple, Saint Lee. I'm honored to witness the modern Iron Fist. Kame School. Danny certainly had never heard of this school from of another world, and was quite embarrassed for a moment, then said, Lee. Brother, forgive my ignorance. No need to be so polite, just call me Saint. Saint waved his hand and started to fabricate a story. In fact, at Kame School we conceal our presence from the world just like Kunlun. We go to even greater lengths to do so. The fact that you haven't heard of my school is absolutely normal, and doesn't bother me at all. So that's the case. Please, just call me Danny too. Danny nodded, showing he understood, and asked with respect, Saint, you're so young, yet you've already mastered the use of ki to such a great extent. Is the Kame style so strong? No, Saint quickly shook his head. To be honest, you've misunderstood. My ki is actually very weak. If you use the power of the invincible Iron Fist, I'd be no opponent of you at all. His words implied that if Danny wouldn't use the power of the Iron Fist, Saint could fight his rather equally. After all, the reason why Danny's ki was so superior to his was the fact that he had that power. If that factor was to be excluded, the gap between the two would become very minimal, and they should at least become equally matched. After all, despite the fact that Saint was still weak, he was still much more proficient in using Ki, for the Dragon Ball world was far more advanced in that regard compared to K'un-Lun. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Saint, who had Goku's lifelong knowledge, had a great edge from the very beginning, one that could allow him to defeat much stronger foes despite his weakness. However, Danny did not catch the hint at all. He looked at the barbecue on the table and said with disbelief, "Saint, you're being too modest. I could practice for another 10 years without becoming able to do what you just did." "Indeed, that would be the case for me as well, didn't have Goku's knowledge." Saint muttered that in his heart, then said, "I'm not being modest, I way be above you in term of skill, but using Ki sense, counting the power of the Iron Fist, the Ki you have in your body is over 10 times as much as mine. My skill could in no way surpass that gap." Ki sense. Danny's eyes became bright and he wanted to continue to talk. As soon as Saint said, "Ki sense is," another guest went through the door. Saint made an apologetic gesture, and turned to greet the guest, "Welcome sir, what do you want to order?" The big-bellied white man was about to order, when Danny grabbed him and gave him a $100 bill saying, "I'm sorry, this store is closed today." Seeing the face of Benjamin Franklin on the bill in his hand, the man realized that he could get 10 meals with this amount of money, and turned around leaving without looking back. Danny closed the store door and hanged the closed sign, turned to look at the gloomy Saint handing him a black credit card saying, "I am sorry for being so rude. Please don't mind. I just have some questions and I want to have some of your time, and I'm willing to compensate you for a month's income in exchange." "Ow, doesn't Danny have a lot of money?" Saint narrowed his eyes, and rolled up his sleeve and stretched out his arm. After receiving the credit card, he billed Danny for a whole $10,000 without hesitation. After handing back the credit card, he said, "On top of this, I want you to promote my barbecue shop." "No problem." Danny Rand nodded in a hurry, and then continued to ask, "Excuse me, what do you mean by the Ki sense?" Chapter 5. Colleen Wing, Daughter of the Dragon. The thing called Ki sense. Saint took a while to think, trying to find the fitting terminology, then explained briefly, "Any living being has its own Ki. Ki sense it a technique of focusing to detect it, it's like having a bioradar. It's our unique skill in Kame school. I can only tell you so much." Danny Rand nodded thoughtfully, remaining silent for a while. He then said honestly, "The reality is that I actually left K'un-Lun on my own, and did not learn all there is learn in their style. A lot of my knowledge on Ki is not very clear. If you may, could you tell me more about what not private to your school?" Thinking of the $10 that he had received, Saint asked, "What do you want to know?" Although Rand was a little unruly, he knew the value of school unique technique. Seeing that Saint did not refuse on the spot, he became overjoyed and immediately asked, "I see that when you use Ki for barbecue, it goes very smoothly. However, whenever I want to summon my body's Ki, it takes a long time, and sometimes I end up failing. I want to know if there's anything that could be done for me to enhance my control." Yes. Having the life knowledge of Goku, he knew the best paths to strength better than anyone. To the hopeful Danny he said 2 words, "Get beaten." "Beaten?" Seeing Danny's questioning eyes, Saint crossed his arms and shrugged his shoulders saying, "The more beatings you get, the faster your defensive instincts get. After all, in the end, it's all about honing your instincts. Your instinct is what will guide you to controlling your Ki perfectly. So that's why." Danny Rand showed a reminiscing expression and muttered to himself, "It is no wonder that back in K'un-Lun, Lei Kung Sensei always hit me." Cough. Listening to Danny Rand, Saint pointed to the table where the barbecue was placed and said, "Danny, let's sit and talk. What else do you want to know?" "All right." Danny Rand sat down again, grabbed a piece of barbecue directly with his hand, placed it into his mouth, and gave a thumbs up for the holy St. Good. "Thank you." Saint also sat down opposite to Danny, seriously reminding him, "Don't forget to advertise for me." "For sure." Danny then wiped his mouth and continued to ask, "About recovering Ki?" "Oh yeah, recovering Ki." The two continued the questioning and answering while eating until it got dark outside. Danny reluctantly got up to leave, wanting to ask more questions. Saint accompanied him to the door, then returned looking at the extra $10,000 in his accounting saying, "Indeed, knowledge is wealth. $10,000 are not a fortune, but they came right in time for Saint to save him in these urgent times. He had no more need to wear a hood and go around streets robbing gangsters. However, he didn't know yet if meeting Kunlun's iron fist is a good thing. He was still very low in strength, and didn't want to attract any non-needed attention. His plan was to remain a low-key person, and wait until he could gather the Dragon Balls again. Only then could he be slightly unscrupulous. Today, he had Danny Rand in. His Kung Fu barbecue was supposed to be no more than a gimmick to attract common people. But if some were to be interested in his Kung Fu, it might bring in all sorts of people. The Hand. Just as Saint thought of Kunlun's deadly rival, he imagined their endless army of ninjas. He realized that he was in more urgent state than he imagined, saying to himself, "It seems that I have to practice harder." Although it was dinner time, he couldn't think of doing business. He hesitantly closed the door and went straight to his flat to continue practicing. The next day, Saint didn't rush to open, although he woke early. He kept practicing till noon, and opened the restaurant at lunchtime. He didn't know if Danny Rand stated advertising his place, but business was exceptionally good. Just 10 minutes after opening, he already had 3 customer, all non-regulars. One of them ordered Kung Fu barbecue, and after the others saw his magical method of cooking the food, they all ordered that as a second plate as well. In all honesty, the special Kung Fu barbecue wasn't top tier, even though it wasn't bad. What really amazed the customers was Saint's method of cooking the food. All the guests going through the door saw this, and everyone ordered the same signature plate and called their friends to see, who also called their friends as well. In no time, the restaurant became full. Soon after, a line formed at the door. Because Saint was caught off guard, he had to be a personal cook, server, and cashier. Filling all 3 posts on such a busy day, he became exhausted. After cleaning up the store, he sat down to take a breath, just when the chimes on the door indicated that another guest was entering. "I must recruit staff members to help." He gritted his teeth fiercely, standing up helplessly and wanting to say that the place was closed and that he still had to wash the dishes. However, when saw the visitor, he couldn't help but to be stunned. The one who pushed the door was an Asian woman of about 20 years of age. She had a petite yet shapely body, and under her long black hair was her delicate beautiful face. To his Chinese taste, she was of stunning and unique perfect beauty. Saint was slightly surprised, but he immediately recognized the girl from his new memories. This was a long-time customer of Li's Chinese restaurant, Colleen Wing. Being Chinese-Japanese, she had lived in China for a few years, before moving to Japan. At her teenage years, she moved to the US. After that, she settled in New York. Her small innocent looks must not deceive him, she was well versed in Aikido and Karate, and a sensei in a martial arts dojo nearby. "Hold on." Because he was stunned, Saint didn't realize that this person was he recognized from his past life as well. Yes. It was Colleen Wing. Iron Fist's future love interest, and the daughter of the dragon. Her sensei, Bakuto, is one of the 5 fingers of the hand, but she didn't know this for a long time. "What are you doing, Saint?" Colleen Wing frowned, and looked strangely at Saint's eyes. "How come you don't seem to recognize me?" Saint got back to reality, laughing and saying, "Oh, not recognize you? Colleen, you're just so beautiful today, I've been stunned." Chapter 6. Saint's first actual combat. Colleen Wing raised her eyebrow of surprise. Back when Saint's parents were still alive, she was a frequent customer of Li's Chinese restaurant. Although she and Saint never had much contact, she had been around him for years and very familiar with him. This Chinese-American teenager 1 year younger than her was usually really shy. He was never as bold as today, but she did like being praised for her beauty. Curious, she couldn't help but ask, "Saint, why was your restaurant closed for so many days? Is there something wrong?" Saint walked over to her, giving her a half-truthful answer, "Nothing, it's just that my training reached a critical point. I've been practicing in the past few days." Practicing? Colleen was surprised and asked suspiciously, "The Li family has martial arts traditions? How come I don't know of that?" Saint shook his head, remembering what he told Danny the day before, "That's not it. I've learned the teaching of the Kame Sennin back when I was a child, but I've never practiced them until now." Kame Sennin. Colleen looked at Saint with a sigh of interest, "A strange name. Is he from Chinatown?" No. Saint shook his head again saying, do you know of Kunlun? Hearing that word, Colleen's eyes went wide open. She remembered the geek she met the other day, Danny Rand. She remained stunned for a while, and then said, yes, I heard about that. Because Saint had already deceived Danny once yesterday, he was lying more smoothly this time around. We at Kame school just like Kunlun keep our presence hidden. Back when I was a child, I met the Kame Shenron by chance as he went to visit the outside world. He accepted me as an apprentice, and taught me how to control ki, and even how to fly. Shenron. Translator note, I've kept the word's pronunciation in Chinese here. It's the same kanji for Sennin in Japanese. It means sage, and whenever the fact that Saint used the Chinese pinyin is not accentuated, I'll be using the more common Kame Sennin as it's far more familiar. Colleen was half Chinese. Having spent most of her life in Japan and New York, she wasn't that good in Chinese. However, words such as Shenron were not forgotten. Saint shrugged his shoulders bragging about his supposed sensei saying, he was a sage indeed, even able to fly in midair. Fly? Colleen gasped and then said, you mean, through practicing ki, people could fly? Yes. Saint nodded and said, it's a very advanced technique called Bukijutsu, T/N, lit. Dancing sky art. But my ki is still far too weak, and in this short period of time, I didn't even reach a level high enough to practice it. Colleen's face was full of disbelief, and she immediately started doubting Saint's word. How old did you say you were when you met this sage? I'm starting to feel that you've been cheated. Saint laughed indifferently, not bothering to argue with her saying, words are empty, you'll see it firsthand later. Soon or later, one day, I will fly before your very eyes. Come to my dojo at any time. Colleen said as she raised her eyebrows, I have to see if it's even real martial arts that you've learned. This was very convenient. Saint was already looking for someone to practice with, and to gauge his current level. He looked back and forth then said, I'm free now. All right. The two stood up, and Colleen left the rice that Saint was preparing for her and said, let's go. Saint quickly took off his work apron, locked the restaurant door and walked half a block with Colleen, soon arriving at her small dojo. She walked to a corner and picked up 2 wooden swords and then asked Saint, do you use weapons? I don't need them. Saint waved his hands and said, I only use my fists. However, I'll make it fair for you, by allowing you to use a sword. What? Colleen sneered and laughed, never imagining that she would be underestimated by Saint. She made up her mind to teach him a lesson. She advanced with her wooden sword staring at his eyes, well, you've asked for this. Because this was Saint's first actual fight, he was rather nervous. However, thanks to Gaku's life experience, he quickly managed to calm down and lift his arms saying, let's go. Take this. Colleen wasn't through saying that when her wooden sword swung forth towards Saint. However, she was shocked to see Saint go forth while dodging swiftly, going past the sword and aiming a fierce elbow to her from the front. What perfect form and footwork! Colleen's eyes shrank sharply and she immediately lifted her left arm to push his elbow to the side, pushing herself away from his body. However, that gained her no room to breathe, as Saint's side kick had already followed. How could he be so fast? She was rather stunned, and found that he had to hold the hilt of her sword with both hands to block it. She thought she was able to use it to block Saint's kick difficultly, only to hear the sound of a crack. Splinters of wood were flying in the air as her sword was actually broken by his kick. After his foot went through the sword, because of his momentum, Saint had to forcibly divert his leg away from Colleen, and then take a step back into a drunken posture. Colleen's eyebrows rose up, and then she walked to the corner of her dojo without saying a word. From her cabinet, she took out a sheathed katana, and pulled out of its sheath. She had obviously recognized Saint's strength, and decided to go all out against him. At the sight of cold steel, Saint's heart inevitably shook. With his current ki, he shouldn't be able to keep a real sword from going through his body. If he was to receive a direct hit, Colleen's dojo was definitely going to see blood. I shouldn't have provoked this mad woman. Saint knew that his regret was far too late, for Colleen, with her katana in hand, immediately attacked him. He did not dare to block her weapon, and felt he was walking on thin ice as he swiftly and carefully dodged all her swings, remaining focused to find a window for a counterattack. The situation wasn't going to remain this stagnant for long. After he dodged over a dozen swings in succession, Saint's footwork inevitably got sloppy, he seemed to have lost his balance. Colleen's eyes shined as she saw her opportunity, and she went in with her sword aggressively. Watching the approaching blade, Saint, while in cold sweat, desperately suppressed his instinct telling him to dodge, and instead walked forwards, straightened his right arm, separating his fingers, pointing at Colleen's chest and shouting, "Jan Ken, Pa!" Translator note: this is how Goku announced his grandpa's rock-paper-scissors attacks. Pa is the paper variant. The description of the attack fits Heiken, also known as Soaring Fist, perfectly, as if it's an evolution of rock-paper-scissors. Inside the sealed dojo, a wild wind blew. Colleen could clearly see that Saint's hand was at least 10 centimeters away from her chest, but he felt an invisible big hand pushing her back. The powerful air current made her eyes open wide out of surprise, and the 2 rounded hemispheres on her chest were squeezed in. At that moment, her feet involuntarily left the floor, and her entire body flew backwards. Chapter 7. Jan Ken. Colleen, who was in mid-air, quickly overcame the panic that naturally overtook her, and adjusted her limbs to find balance and steadily land on both feet. After taking 3 steps back and forth, she realized that she was rather exhausted. She reached for her chest, as she did feel she was hit hard. She quickly realized that aside from some soreness on her chest, she wasn't seriously hurt, although the 2 most prominent points on it were a bit numb. After Saint was able to push her in mid-air, he felt weak all over his body. He couldn't help but bend down with his palm upon his knees, gasping for breath. Colleen on the other side, who was rather embarrassed, lifted her sword, so he shouted, "Stop! I'm out of strength. I admit defeat." Colleen pointed her sword at the ground and snorted in frustration. She was unable to hold back her curiosity and asked, "Saint, was that a Kame school attack?" Saint wiped the sweat off his forehead, stood up straight and nodded, "Well, that's pot, or paper, from Kame Sennin's entry technique, Jan Ken, or rock paper scissors. Ku, or rock, stands for punching attacks, Kyoki, or scissors, stands for finger attacks, and Pa stands for open palm attacks." By using Jan Ken Pa while manipulating ki on the palm of his hands, Saint was able to use it as an energy attack to push the enemy away. After mastering this, he speculated he would be able to use it to pull or bind the enemy. Although it was an entry-level move, compared to regular ki release that he used to cook the meat, this one consumed a lot more ki. That's why Saint barely had energy to stand up after using it, as he almost completely exhausted the ki in his body. Entry technique? This school sounds really amazing. Colleen unconsciously raised her hands to rub her sour chest. While she didn't notice, her unintentional movement made Saint's eyes glued to her, they opened wide, his mouth went dry and he wanted just to shout, "Let me in you bosom." But he didn't, of course he didn't. His great self-restraint allowed him to turn away and cough sighing, "Cough, so, now you believe that what I've learned is the real deal." Translator note: it's official, Saint is no saint. And he's also a true apprentice of Mutant Rashi. Colleen puffed and said to herself, "If this isn't the real deal, then what have I been learning all these years?" Remaining calm on the surface, she asked, "Can anyone learn the Kame school teachings?" Saint seemed to think, and then said ambiguously, "In theory, yes. But it would be necessary for one to develop their ki in order to be able to master these technique. I have only recently mastered just a little bit of this." Being affiliated with the Hand, whose founder were banished from Kunlun, Colleen was no stranger to ki. When she heard the word, her eyes turned bright, and as she was striving to be stronger, she was naturally very interested in Saint's method. She said, "That means I can learn it." "Yeah," Saint looked at her and said, "Your ki is actually superior to mine, but you're not using it well at all, that's the only reason why I can be faster or stronger." Colleen's mouth showed a smile as she asked, "Can you teach me? Or could only a sensei teach these techniques? Things don't have to be so formal with sensei and apprentice." Hearing Saint, Colleen's eyes shined with hope. His voice dropped in pitch as he said, "Just be my girlfriend." Colleen was stunned, and smile was wiped off of her face. She raised her katana and pointed to the door yelling, "Get out! Hey, be careful with that!" Saint laughed and obediently walked to the door. As he was leaving, he turned around to her and waved, "See you around, Colleen." "Shut!" Colleen turned around and shut the door in his face. After remaining tense for a way, she suddenly snapped into a smile, "This guy has actually become much more interesting than before. Also, that pushing technique of his is quite special. Hey, I didn't even get to eat." "Well, I can just forget about lunch, I'll just have dinner. On the other side, Saint walked out of the dojo, going straight to his restaurant. He went to the kitchen, put on rubber gloves, and started washing dishes. I need to hire. He was already half dead by the time he finished cleaning the pile of dirty dishes that was awaiting him. He wiped his hands indiscriminately, went up, printed out a job ad flyer and went directly to hang it up the store door. It said, 1 waiter needed, free meals and accommodation, negotiable salary. By then, the evening was approaching, and he couldn't take a break. As soon as he was through with preparing the side dishes, he heard the chimes from the door side. Welcome to Lee's. As he went out from the kitchen, he was surprised and had to change his line, why are you here again? Why wouldn't I be here? Can't I come to eat? Colleen, who had skipped lunch and been hungry since noon, came through the door before anyone. She did not enter, and instead pointed at Saint's flyer saying, you found a waiter. How could I just? I put that up just now. He walked forward and jokingly said, so, willing to close your dojo and come work for me? Bah! She muttered, you wish, and then said with a serious face, I have a new student, a street orphan. Although she was caught in a theft case, she's actually a good kid, she's just unlucky. Can you hire her as a waitress? Well, when can she start? Saint, who seemed to be joking, was dead serious. With all the chores he was having to take, he was willing to accept a murderer as a waiter, let alone a harmless child thief. She can start tonight. She has worked before as a waitress and can directly start working. I'll call her now. Colleen noticed Saint's eagerness, took out her phone, walked 2 steps away and made a phone call. She soon returned and said, I'm sure she'll be here in a minute. Great. You've helped me a lot. Saint said enthusiastically, come in, take a seat, dinner's on the house tonight. Colleen shook her head saying, thank you, I will eat, but I'll pay. Uncle Lee and with them gone, things shouldn't be easy for you. No, don't worry. Saint said, I'm doing pretty well financially. You won't believe it. Yesterday, I met a very rich guy who interrupted my work. Because of that, he compensated me with an entire month's income. Chapter 8. Lorna Lane's hair. Super rich guy, entire month. Colleen muttered those words, getting a sense of déjà vu. After a while, her eyes widened and she said, this rich guy, could his name be Danny Rand? Saint was surprised and said, hey. How do you know? He also distracted me the other day, and compensated with 3 months' worth of dojo rent. After some awkward silence, Saint grinned his teeth yelling, 3 months? That jerk values looks over friendliness. I've only got 1 month's worth compensation. Colleen looked silently at Saint, surprised by his point of concern. She avoided talking more about money and sat down at a table saying, so, your offer is still on? Of course. Saint returned to usual saying, so, do you want the usual? Or do you want to try my newly developed key barbecue? Alright, I'll try that out. Great. Coming right up. Saint quickly brought a large plate of sliced raw meat, and cooked it with key in front of Colleen. While she had seen Jan Ken before, this technique looked completely different. As he finished cooking the meat, she could not help but marvel, that's astonishing. What's this technique? How did you do it? This is actually just a basic skill. It's not a move. I'm just releasing ki. The principle is very simple. Ki is a form of life energy, and its release produces high energy. Doing barbecue this way is also a form of practice, one that allows me to control ki more finely. After this simple explanation, Saint handed Colleen a knife and fork saying, try it. Thanks. Enjoy. I have to greet the guests now, so I'll have to leave you. Go, don't worry about me. With dinner time arriving, the restaurant was full again. Knowing that he was going to get busy, Saint made more preparations this time, reducing his workload compared to lunch. After Colleen finished eating, she went in and helped him. Then, a 17 or 18-year-old short-haired girl joined the two without even talking to Saint. As H looked at her in eyes, he realized she was Colleen's disciple. Seeing how skilled and comfortable she was with the service, it was obvious to him that she was not stranger to waiting tables. With 2 helpers, things went much easier for Saint, and before he knew, the dinner shift was done. After all the customers left, he turned the closed sign. Colleen went to the short-haired girl and said, "Take some rest now, let's sit down and chat." The three sat around a table. Saint looked at the new girl and took the initiative to introduce himself. "Hello, I'm Saint Li, an old friend of Colleen." The girl had delicate and slightly Germanic features, a thin face, a slender body and pale white skin. While she looked physically weak and fragile, her eyes were shining with unyielding strength, which made her exude a sense of contradiction. While all her other features predict she would be a blonde, her hair was pitch black. Hearing Saint, she looked at him with her big green eyes vigilantly, answering, "Lorna Lane's hair. May I call you Lorna?" Saint paused until he saw her nod, and then continued, "Lorna, I can give you a monthly salary of $1,500. You'll have a couple of 3-hour shifts, one at noon and one in the evening. You can get free accommodation and food. Because I have no kitchen assistants, if you are willing to help me with preparations, I'm willing to add an extra $8 per hour for such work. Now, think about my proposition and tell me if you have any problems." Being an orphan, Lorna had many hardships, even having to live on the streets very early in her life. She had to work as waitress for quite a while. She had theft on her record, and no one was willing to hire her. Saint's proposition was more than generous, and she immediately nodded, "No problem, I accept all your term, and would very much like to do extra chores for extra money." "All right." Saint nodded back, then turned to Colleen saying, "What do you think?" "I have no objections," she smiled and said jokingly, "just don't you dare bully my student." "All right, then all is settled." As Saint laughed, he stood up and extended his right hand to the new employee saying, "Lorna, welcome to Lee's Chinese restaurant." Lorna was stunned at first, then stood up and shook Saint's hand saying, "So, should I call you boss?" "As you like." Saint shrugged saying, "This is a small restaurant with not too many rules, you can call me boss, Saint, Mr. Lee, whatever you want." Lorna remained quiet for a while and then said, "I'll stick with boss." "Okay." Saint nodded, and then hesitated before saying, "Lorna, do you have a place to live or?" Colleen did not let him finish, rushing to say, "Saint, she doesn't have a place to live, you have to arrange a room for her." "Sensei." Lorna turned around with some embarrassment and said to Colleen, "I live outside and I can take care of myself." "No." Colleen looked at her seriously, "Live where? Some abandoned building? Do you want to get caught and have property invasion added to your record?" Having her problems exposed one after the other, Lorna couldn't take it anymore and stubbornly said to Colleen, "Sensei, I'm free to choose where I live. You can't make such a decision for me. I'm your sensei." "Cough, Colleen, don't worry." Seeing things getting a little out of control, Saint quickly coughed and interrupted the two, "Lorna, so I'll arrange you a room in the top floor and you can stay there for the time being. As for deciding where you'll eventually stay, let's leave that decision for later, all right?" Lorna nodded silently, glancing at the slightly gloomy Colleen, and then she walked away saying, "Boss, there are some tables left to clean up, I'll go to work." "Go ahead. Clean up, wash the dishes, and then you can get off work." "Great." Chapter 9. The Power of Polaris. When Lorna left them, Saint turned to Colleen looking at her in surprise whispering, "What was that all about? You were very insistent, that's not like the usual you at all." "You don't know." Colleen seemed to be hesitant, then she puffed and said, "This child is special. It would be too dangerous for her to live alone. If we don't be careful, she'll be targeted." "You've got a point there." Saint thought of Lorna's exquisite face, which was indeed stunningly beautiful, and said, "That beautiful girl could indeed get in trouble really easy." "That's not what I meant." Colleen shook her head helplessly, and then approached Saint's ear and said, "She's a mutant." "Mutant? Lorna Lane's hair?" Saint suddenly felt like he was hit by truck, he unconsciously said, "No, no." Colleen frowned at his reaction, "What do you mean by that?" "I only told you because I've always perceived you as someone sympathetic to the experience of a mutant. That's why I decided to tell you." "No, you misunderstood, I didn't mean to discriminate against her." Saint shook his head quickly and said, "I just suddenly remembered another mutant with the last name Lane's hair." Eric Lane's hair, also known as Magneto, was a man whose powers knew no bounds in the presence of any metal. However, this was all impossible. Soon after Saint crossed over, he did his thorough investigation. Although there were a few mutants here and there, they were never that prominent. Neither the X-Men nor the Brotherhood of Mutants were formed in this world. In fact, under the rigorous surveillance of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Sentinel services, the mutants were simply unable to form a decent force. In fact, the leader of the Brotherhood of Mutants, Magneto, should not exist, for if he did, such an unruly character would never sit still in such a world. Then, how in the world could his daughter Lorna Lane's hair, who has a variant of his ability, and was known his world as Polaris, exist in this world? Was this all just a bizarre coincidence? Saint did not believe it was, and curiously activated his key sense and tried to perceive Lorna. The next moment, before Colleen's eyes, he inexplicably looked extremely scared and shocked, with sweat dripping down his forehead. What happened to you? My God! What's Tong Ki? Saint wasn't even answering Colleen, he was just shocked and could not keep himself from uttering those words. The girl he deemed as weak and fragile, had ki that's on a completely different level from him, 50 times as much as him. Since Saint had already double the ki of a normal human, this meant Lorna was actually a 100 times as strong as a regular human. With the strength of 100, she's indeed worthy of being Polaris. What on earth are you talking about? Colleen frowned and pushed Saint, what strong ki? Saint gulped and looked at Colleen silently. He was saying to himself, naive mortal, you know nothing about her powers. You're actually worried about her safety? She could beat dozens of me at a time. Colleen, you worry too much. Lorna is strong, very strong. Ordinary people couldn't hold a candle to her. Colleen's face changed, as if telling Saint he's an idiot, and she said, you've got me all wrong, you genius. She's a mutant. I'm not worried about just her safety, I'm worried about everyone around her. Once a mutant is awakened, they would get an immediate insane boost in power. With such changes happening so quickly to her body, it will naturally be different to adapt. And mutants vary in their ability to control themselves. Saint understood this well, and said, hey, are you worried that she would go out of control and even cause casualties, to be hunted down later by the S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Sentinel services? S.H.I.E.L.D. Colleen pouted, I know of the Sentinel services, what is S.H.I.E.L.D.? Translator note, to my knowledge, the Sentinel services did not make presence in any work that's linked to the MCU directly. I believe the minimum role of mutants makes it a valid choice from the author to make them a more commonly known but less prominent part of this world. Just like Lorna Dane Lane's hair, the difference in name, description, and circumstances could be attributed to their presence in different worlds, just like Quicksilver is present on both Earth 19999 and Earth 10005. Damn it! I slipped up. Saint did not think his words through. Unlike the Sentinel Service Department who were working in the daylight, S.H.I.E.L.D. was more of a secret organization, the ordinary people should not know of. He didn't know how to answer Colleen, so he just went with giving her the long name, yeah, that's the acronym for Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement Logistics Division. What is this division? Colleen was surprised, you didn't just make this up, didn't you? Haha, Saint smiled and said, no, it's real, and most people who get the long name ask for the acronym. Good God! What a weird name! Colleen puffed and returned to her main topic that was being forgotten. She said once again, Saint. You have to let Lorna live here for as long as possible. I fear for her being alone on the streets. You're not afraid that she would go out of control here, destroying me and my stone? Saint thought. He turned a blind eye to that, and even though he was a little reluctant, he just said, I'll try my best, but it seems to me that she's almost as stubborn as you are. I can't promise anything. What? The same as me? That's a little bit too many words. Colleen also turned a blind eye to Saint's words, I'm going back to my dojo, I'll let you deal with this. Saint nodded, and after seeing Colleen leave, he found the spare keys and gave them to Lorna. These are the keys to the store, the big one if for the front door, and the small ones for the back door. After you're through with work, remember to lock everything. Tomorrow we start at 11:30 am, don't wake up late. Disregarding the dumbfounded look on Lorna's face, Saint went straight up the stairs to the living room on the second floor, which was not ready for Lorna at all. If Colleen didn't go before he thought of it, he might have asked her to help him out. That's weird. Lorna watched Saint's back disappear at the stairs, and could not help but ask, isn't he afraid that I would steal anything? With theft being on her record, Lorna was used to people's suspicions. Even if they don't say anything, they are always worried about that. Saint left hundreds of dollars in the cash register, but he did not seem to worry at all, and even gave her keys to the store. Chapter 10. Dragon Balls being restored? Is this a test? Lorna glanced at a pile of banknotes on the counter, and stepped away from them as if they were a venomous snake. She kept thinking about Saint's purpose for a long time. She never realized that Saint was simply frightened by her immense key, to the point that he had to hide in his room just to conceal his shock. In fact, Saint became even more shocked when he thought of Lorna's potential. His surprise had prevented him of thinking about this before, but her key, 50 times greater than his, was just that of her as a clueless teen. She probably had very poor control of her powers that were going to evolve to a much higher point if she was anything like the Polaris he knew from the stories. I thought I was something, and here I am being scared by an 18-year-old girl. Saint couldn't help but smile at the thought. He got up and walked out of his master bedroom, going to the 2 other rooms in the flat. He decided to make them a staff dorm, and had to remove any personal items from inside them. After finishing, Saint brought Lorna upstairs, let her pick one of the 2 bedrooms, and then handed her a white A4 sheet of paper and a marker pen, saying, "All right, write your name on the paper and stick it on your door." Lorna did just that. After a while, she found herself looking at a door with her name upon it, and suddenly realized that this was the first time that she had her name on anything. My own room. Lorna bit her teeth gently, forcibly suppressing the hopes in her heart, silently saying to herself, "You are a mutant, there is no place to where you belong." "Boss, is there anything else? I haven't finished washing the dishes yet." "Nothing else." He watched Lorna quickly walking down the stairs, and couldn't help but frown. He could clearly sense her key fluctuating drastically a moment ago. When mutants get emotionally excited or agitated, their abilities get out of control. This was almost common sense. Therefore, Saint started to question himself again. Could he really afford to have the young Polaris here? At her peak, she's on par with a prime Magneto. If she was to lose control, she could destroy his place and restaurant in an instant. Too much thinking. I need to practice. Saint shook away these thoughts, and realized he had to stop worrying about people and improve himself. As long as he's strong enough, he could handle any problem. Too slow. 3 hours later, Saint walked out of the quiet room, very dissatisfied with his progress. At the same time, he made up his mind. The next time he gathers the Dragon Balls, he'd just ask Shenron for the physique of Saiyan. Yes, he might not evolve as quickly as Goku, but even if his improvement speed just doubled, he'd be very satisfied. Thinking of this, he looked at the back of his head unconsciously, just to be surprised that 1/3 of the pattern on the back of his hand had turned from grey to red. It's been only 10 days since he made his last wish. Does this mean that in around 20 more days, the Dragon Balls would be restored? Saint could not yet rely on the 5-star Dragon Ball to sense the positions of the other ones until its energy is fully replenished. He could only make a wild guess. How could this be so fast? Could it be that one of the Dragon Balls fell near a high-energy body? Perhaps something like one of the Infinity Stones. Saint could only remember 2 Infinity Stones existing on Earth today. The Time Stone, contained inside the Eye of Agamotto, was under the protection of the Masters of the Mystic Arts in the Holy Land of Camartage. The Space Stone, contained within the Tesseract, is lying together with Captain America somewhere under the ice in the Arctic Ocean. T/N, actually Howard Stark found the Tesseract long before Cap was located. That wouldn't do. Indeed, if that was the case, Saint would be in trouble. How would he be able to get through the hardest of conditions to dig the Dragon Ball out of ice? As for the Time Stone, Camartage should be protected with magic, so the Dragon Ball shouldn't fall there, probably. It's useless to think about this now, I'll just have to wait until the Dragon Ball's energy is replenished. All of a sudden Saint had an ominous hunch. He went downstairs to the restaurant, and found that all the tables were cleaned up, and that all the dishes were cleaned and stacked neatly in their proper places. Both doors of the place were properly locked. As for Lorna, she had already disappeared. She must have returned to her residence. Like Colleen said, that should be some abandoned building. Yawn. Saint went back upstairs all sleepy. He had been busy all day, and it was time for him to rest. Early the next morning, he woke up on time, and went out to buy a batch of new ingredients, put it into the refrigerator of the restaurant and then went to his quiet room on the second floor, continuing his practice until 11 a.m. With the sound of the alarm clock, he left the room and opened the restaurant downstairs. He still had some time until launch, but just as he turned around after opening the door, he heard those chimes again as someone entered. Saint still had a lot of preparation to do. He turned around saying, "Sorry, we're not surveying until launch time." "Hey! I'm not here to eat." The one walking through the door was a 15-year-old skinny boy. He looked at Saint, who was just 2 years older than him, and asked a little hesitantly, "Excuse me, are you the owner of this restaurant?" Saint nodded, answering reluctantly, "Yes, what is it that you want?" "Hello. My name is Peter Parker and I want to apply for a job as an assistant." Saint suspected that something was wrong with his ears. After a long awkward silence, he asked again, "What's your name again?" "Peter Parker, sir." Translator note: the author had mentioned several times that he is well aware of the differences between his storyline and the details shown in the MCU films and series. In fact, it seems to me that the reference to MCU is just for the sake of familiarity, as the author changed more than one detail to drive the story forward in great directions. All these changes are similar to differences between different Marvel worlds, and I honestly like them, and I hope that you all enjoy them as well. Chapter 11. Peter Parker. I can't believe this. In face of the teenager saying he is Peter Parker, Saint used key sense immediately, and then nodded with relief, saying to himself, his key is normal, they must just share the same name, that's it. I can't possibly encounter the Iron Fist on my first day of work, Polaris on the second, and now Spider-Man on the third. Wait, perhaps he wasn't bitten by a spider yet. My name is Saint Lee. After an awkward silence, Saint finally get back to reality and introduced himself, and then asked, "P. Mr. Parker, are you of legal working age? I don't want to be a child laborer." "Of course." Peter nodded quickly and took out a document from his backpack. "Boss Lee, call me Peter. As you can see, I'm 16 years old." Saint glanced at Peter's working papers and looked at Peter's backpack saying, "Peter, you're a high school student I believe? I'm not planning on hiring part-time workers." No. Peter shook his head again and again before Saint's suspicious eyes, and said, "I mean, yes. I'm a high school student, but I'm planning on working part-time. You see, besides weekends, I'll come every morning after school, and I'll be here before midday. I'll leave for school at 3 p.m., and then return after school at 6 at the latest. I believe this should be completely in line with the working hours here." "Perfect, no. There is still one question," Saint thought. Out of caution, he calmly asked, "Peter, I have to keep the place open until 8 or 9. Do you have no problems with getting home so late?" "My parents have passed away, in an air crash." Peter's expression revealed a hint of sadness, and his sentences became more concise. "I'll get my guardian, Aunt May, to sign a form of consent for you." "Parent who died in an air crash? Aunt May? This is not someone who shares his name. It seems that young Spidey hasn't been bitten yet." Saint looked at Peter saying, "I'm very sorry. In fact, just a few months ago, I've lost my parents in an air crash, so I can relate." "So that's it." Peter's clap of a sudden realization interrupted Saint, "I thought you looked too young to be a restaurant owner." Peter suddenly realized that his reaction was very bad. Looking at Saint's miserable look, he lowered his head and added, "Oh, that's really unfortunate. I'm horribly sorry." The dumbfounded Saint patted on Peter's shoulder and euphemistically refused, "Peter, you are still young, you should stay in school more. Working with me would take too much of your time, it's not for you." "Oh no." Peter uttered an exaggerated sigh, and his face became anxious, and he quickly pleaded with enthusiasm, "Boss Lee, believe me. I have very good grades, and keeping up with my studies is no problem for me. Please Boss Lee, I've been relying on Aunt May for far too long, and I have to find a job to alleviate some of the burden. Please give me a chance, I'll work very hard." Saint was a bit soft-hearted after all. After listening to Peter's sincere pleading, he couldn't utter any words of refusals. "Well, I can't stop you from helping your elders. As long as your guardian agrees, I'll accept you here." "Yes." Peter punched the air in happiness. "Thank you. Thank you, boss. I've applied for work in 3 fancy restaurants, 5 pizza shops, and 6 cafes, they all refused. I was desperate." Stop. Saint had a headache, he pulled out his cell phone and said, "Give me your contact information." "Right, do you live nearby?" "My phone number is, I live in Queens, but not too far from here. The subway is just 7 stops away, this will still be very easy. I go to the school every day on the subway. I will pass by here. The school is very close to here, just 5 minutes away." "Eh? I just realized that your restaurant is right between the subway station and my school." "Stop." Saint's head was aching more and more, and he had a hint of regret. "While this area is rather good, it isn't the most peaceful place at night. If you don't live nearby, do you think your aunt will agree that you work here?" "What?" Peter grabbed the back of his head, was a bit dumbfounded and said, "I will convince Aunt May. I am a man, I can protect myself." "He's not going to stop again." Saint put his index before Peter's mouth and said, "Call her now. As I said before, I will accept you only if she agrees." "Okay, boss, please wait." After a while, Peter gave Saint the phone. He had no idea what promise did Peter make to get this, but May gave Saint her verbal consent through the phone. After he hung up, he nodded to Peter, "All right. Welcome to Lee's Chinese restaurant. When you're ready, you can come to work here." "Yes." Peter excitedly punched his one palm, rolled up his sleeve and said, "Boss, I am ready. What should I do?" Facing this new employee with no prior experience, Saint couldn't look at him straight and pointed to the back of the shop, "Take your bag and put it in a locker. Work clothes are hung on the wall over there. Find the most fitting ones and change. Now I have something to do, so wait for Lorna. You have anything you don't understand, just ask her." "Boss, who is Lorna?" "Like you, she's part of the staff. You'll know when you see her." After releasing a sigh of frustration, Saint walked into the kitchen without looking back, and quickly began slicing the meat and preparing the side dishes. Peter took around 10 minutes of his time, and he was rather in a hurry. 10 minutes later, Lorna arrived to the restaurant on time. She pushed the door, spotting the young man who seemed like he might be underage. Right behind her, a tall brown-haired woman followed. "Hi. My name's Peter. Are you Lorna?" The brown-haired woman squinted at Peter and waved impatiently, "You have mistaken me for someone else. Welcome, please sit down." Lorna stepped forward and greeted the brown-haired woman, then pushed Peter aside. "I am Lorna. You're new here? Go to the side and wait for a while." Chapter 12. These rich people. "Oh." Peter nodded unconsciously and took 2 steps back. He watched Lorna take a menu and gently place it on the table. Then, she said to the brown-haired woman, "What do you want to eat?" The customer obviously had her request prepared, and did not bother looking into the menu before saying, "Kung Fu Barbecue. This dish is served by weight. How many pounds do you want?" "Let's start with 1. "All right, just a second." Lorna took away the menu and walked into the kitchen to say to Saint, "Boss, 1 pound of Kung Fu Barbecue for 1 customer." "You're here." Without raising his head, Saint answered while cutting the vegetables, "All right, I'll serve." "Have you seen people?" "He's a new assistant, with no work experience. Teach him more about work." "All right." Lorna nodded, went in and changed into her work clothes, then returned to Peter to tell him what to do. After a while, Saint left the kitchen with a plate of sliced raw meat. He looked around, and the woman caught his eyes. He went and put the plate on her table, using key before her eyes to cook the meat. Facing what she couldn't explain with science, the woman was extremely shocked. Her blue eyes were wide open, and her right hand went gently over her red lips, just to keep herself from screaming. "Please enjoy." Saint turned around and was about to go back to the kitchen, when the brown-haired woman stood up shouting, "Please wait." He turned back to hear her say, "My name is Joy Meacham, an old friend of Danny Rand." She extended her hand to shake hands with Saint. Saint realized who she was. This was Danny's childhood friend, and very wealthy. She, along with her brother, was running Rand Enterprises for the past few years. Why she was in Lee's Chinese restaurant was a mystery to Saint, for she shouldn't be as interested as Danny in Qi and Kung Fu. "Hi, I'm Saint Lee." Saint shook her hand and said, "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Meacham. Can we sit down and talk?" Of course. At this time, there were still no other customers going through the door. Saint nodded and sat down on the other side of the table, "It would be a pleasure." Joy looked at the barbecue in front of her, saying with a hint of emotion in her voice, "Mr. Lee, just 3 minutes ago, I used to think you're just a liar playing tricks." Saint raised his eyebrows, surprised by her straightforwardness, and answered, "It is okay. It's our instinct as humans to feel doubtful when facing the unknown. To be honest, I still can't fully believe you yet." With a sharp gaze, Joy stared at Saint. "Perhaps, you are just that good at doing magic tricks." "Ha ha." Saint showed an ambiguous smile and said, "Ms. Meacham, I don't believe I owe you anything. There's no need for me to prove myself to you. Ki exists, whether you believe it or not. What you think of me does not change that." Joy narrowed her eyes, pouted and said, "Mr. Lee, it seems that you don't know who I am." I know who you are, Ms. Meacham, and I know how prestigious your family is, how you are the director of Rand Enterprises, and how you are worth hundreds of millions." Saint lifted his hand to keep her from interrupting him and continued, "What does that mean for me?" Joy took a deep breath and reluctantly suppressed the anger in her heart, revealing a diplomatic smile. "I've been rude. In fact, I've only come here today because of Danny. He told me that having Kung Fu barbecue in here would get me to believe he's saying the truth." She paused, and then said in a pleading tone, "So, Mr. Lee, please understand. Please provide me with proof that Ki exists. For me and for Danny, this is very important for me, and for Danny." Saint understood her finally. Danny must have told her a lot of unbelievable things about things like Kunlun and the hand. Without providing proof, she'd send him to a mental hospital just like she did in the series. At this point, Saint couldn't help but curiously ask, "He didn't summon the Iron Fist for you?" "I think that nothing could prove the existence of Ki if a fist that shines from the inside out doesn't." He didn't." Joy looked at him with amazement. "However, he did mention this Iron Fist. I understood nothing of what he was talking about." Aha, Saint knew that although Danny had learned some information from him, he shouldn't be able to summon the Iron Fist wantonly. After thinking about the matter, he extended his right hand to Joy. "Well, I will help him again then. Ms. Meacham, through a technique named Ki transfer, I can transfer my own Ki to others. Please, give me your hand, and I'll get you to feel Ki firsthand." Joy was a bit reluctant, but then slowly extended her arm, carefully placing her 5 slender fingers in Saint's hands. "Is this okay?" Saint nodded. "Close your eyes, and try to ignore any surrounding voice. Focus, and when you're ready, let me know." A moment later, Joy said with a gentle tone, "I am ready." The next moment, Joy opened her eyes wide opened, and her entire body trembled slightly, as if hit by an electric shock. She quickly pulled back her right hand, looking straight at her fingertips. This is Ki." By the time she raised her head to look at Saint, he was already halfway through the kitchen door, saying only one sentence, "Tell Danny Rand he owes me one. Stun them with what you have, and walk away." How cool is that? Saint thought triumphantly. However, soon after he entered the kitchen, he was followed by Lorna, who had a look of awe on her face, and she handed him a black credit card saying, "Boss, our customer went to the door, locked it, and hanged the closed sign. When I went to stop her, she gave me this card and she said you can process whatever amount of money you want." Facing such a familiar situation, the corner of Saint's mouth twitched, and he muttered, with some envy in his voice, "These rich people." Chapter 13. Sudden Attack. Saint put down the kitchen knife from his hand, took the card from Lorna, and walked out of the kitchen to the checkout counter. Just like he did with Danny, he charged Joy $10. He then went to her, returning her credit card and saying, "So, Ms. Meacham, what's the matter?" Joy reached out with her right hand to take the credit card with 2 fingers, and gracefully tucked it back into her wallet. Then she said, "Mr. Lee, I want to ask you for a favor." Thinking if the 10 grands he had just made, he could only answer saying, "Go ahead." If what Danny has been telling me about is true, then Rand Enterprises is in great trouble. I'm afraid that just Danny and I are not enough to face all this trouble. We need my brother Ward on our side. If we are all together, we could get through this. However, without evidence, Ward will not believe us. Please help me convince him. Ms. Meacham, I don't like proving myself to people. I've chosen to get you to feel Ki purely for Danny and..." What? Halfway through, Saint's pupils expanded abruptly, and he quickly reached out, pushing Joy and yelling, "Get down!" Being unprepared, Joy took a very hard push from Saint, one that made her entire body fall to the side, slamming heavily into the ground. She screamed loudly, but she had no time to complain about the pain. With a look of horror, she watched the glass door that used to be right behind her getting slammed into countless pieces with a black axe spinning through it to where she was standing. Being pushed down had actually saved her life. "Be careful!" As Joy screamed, Saint raised his arm, and almost magically grabbed the axe's handle as it was halfway to the wall across the restoring. "Who did I provoke?" Saint quickly glanced at the shattered shop door, and watched as 6 bald Asian young men rushed in aggressively with axes in hand. From their tattoos, they looked like members of a certain Chinese gang. The Axe Gang? They exist in this world as well. Saint had no time to think. He screamed to Joy, "Stay on the ground, do get up. Call the cops." Then, he turned to Lorna saying, "Lorna, take Peter and go hide in the back of the store." After that, Saint took the axe, and threw it out of the store. He did not retreat, and instead rushed out behind it, taking advantage of the fact that the gangsters were trying to dodge the flying axe, and punching the first one of them to cross his way. Since Saint wanted to lay low, he only used the least spectacular of his attacks. It was Jan Kengu, rock, and if one was to observe carefully, they'd see a blue line forming in the air around his fist. It was Saint's ki. The one to receive the punch to the chest spurted a great amount of blood on the spot. Before anyone knew, he was in mid-air flying out of the store. After landing, blood just kept flowing out of his mouth. Obviously, Saint had inflicted great internal injuries to him, and broken several of his ribs. He was in great pain, unable to stand up. 5 more to go. Saint looked at the number of enemies she'd face, and increased the output of ki in his body. The blue light flowing on his fists became more and more obvious. Well, the thing is that you'll be riding it anyway would give him more range in his attacks, but would also drain him out faster. With Gu, he could reinforce him punches as long as he has ki in his body. Also, as long as he doesn't make contact with an enemy, his ki consumption would remain negligible. In this way, it was the most efficient tool to fight at his current level. On top of that, time was on his side. As soon as the New York police arrive, he'd be in a more comfortable position. Therefore, after taking down one of his enemies, he did not rush it, and instead took a step back, waving his index to show that they should not go this way. Saint knew that these gangsters shouldn't be after a low-profile character such as him, but probably after Joy Meacham who was inside. He had to keep them out of the store, and thus ensure that threat to her life is minimal. On top of that, he had to keep Lorna out of it, as her possible loss of control could lead to great trouble. The remaining 5 looked at their companion on the ground, and were rather intimidated. The thing that popped up in their minds first was that they were facing a martial arts master. They were stunned, each waiting for one of the others to be the first to advance. Attack! After an awkward 10 seconds long silence, a gangster with a mustache raised his axe and rushed in screaming in Chinese, "I'll slice you up." "So you're the one." Saint's eyes shined and he immediately stepped sideways to the left, dodging the axe and raising his right hand, to land a vicious punch to his enemy's side. The impact of the ki-wrapped fist on the gangster's body caused a wave to spread on his body, and made his feet leave the ground involuntarily. His whole body flew up and back, and was over a meter high in the air before beginning to fall down. When still in midair, he felt his innards bursting in pain. He did not fall gracefully, for the pain made his limbs fall into convulsions and his face distort. By the time he hit the ground, his eyes had turned white, and his face was covered with a mess of foam, snot, and blood. This all happened in a split second, and his colleges could not afford to blink, as their faces became more gloomy than their already tainted souls. After that one attack from Saint, he did not carry on attacking. He looked at the other 4, and slowly advances towards them waiting for their next attack. Seeing the terrible state of their fellow, the 4 stood still with their spirits broken. This time, they didn't even bother to rearrange their formation. With them not encircling Saint, he found several windows to attack, and he rushed in at them as a vicious tiger. Chapter 14. Saint Ferocious. Saint stared at a gangster with a sickle-shaped scar on his face. The latter waved his axe randomly, trying to gather his courage at the same time, loudly asking for help, "Come with me." However, because of his fellows' positioning, he was rather isolated, and none of them was in a position to move in without exposing themselves to another one of Saint's vicious attacks. Saint quickly attacked with a side kick that his foes could barely see coming, and knocked the scar-faced gangster's axe to the ground. Then, he advanced to deliver what seemed to be a karate chop. No. It was another punch. Well, this punch wasn't like the others, and the poor axeman with the scar on his face had to be grateful. Saint's punch hit him on the button, knocking him out cold before he could feel much pain. What was to happen when he was to wake up, however, was a whole different story. Only 3 were left. They saw Saint's blood-stained fists go back to his side after knocking their companion down, and fear took over their hearts. Suddenly, Saint turned around, glancing at them. It shook them even further. They looked at each other in great fear. Who is this guy? How could he be so strong? How come the ones with the blades are the ones who are bleeding? The 3 lost their courage, and were filled with hesitations. If it wasn't for their 3 companions on the ground, they couldn't wait, turn around and run. One of them, having an earring, looked away and rushed at Saint, while yelling to the remaining 2, "I'll hold him back, and you retrieve the others." His idea was good, but he was unfortunately forgetting about the current dire situation. With Saint's advantage in key amount and control, he was much faster and stronger than they could imagine. Once any one of the 6 was to leave the formation, he was doomed to be immediately destroyed. What the earring gangster asked his companions to do was going to take them a lot more than 2 steps, which was exactly what it took Saint to deliver punch to the gangster back, bringing him down to the ground immediately. As the earring guy fell to the ground, blood spewed out of his mouth, soiling the tables. The next moments, the sound of chimes could be heard at the door, for the 2 remaining gangsters looked at each other with gloomy faces, saying in unison, "Run." Saint looked at the 2 running away, secretly sighing. He did not think of pursuing them. After successfully bringing down 4 of these gangsters, he was almost out of ki, and couldn't even do one other Jan Kengu. While he should be able to win if the fight was to carry on, victory wouldn't have come without some struggle. Anyway, disregarding the state of the fallen 4 gangsters on the floor, Saint went to the back of the store and yelled, "Come out, it's over." Hearing him, Joy Meacham poked her head out from under a table. She had obeyed him blindly, keeping her head down all the time. Saint gave her a hand and said, "Ms. Meacham, why would you go around without a bodyguard? I don't like having someone follow me." Joy grabbed Saint's arm and stood up, then patted the dust off of her body, saying, "Call me Joy, by the way. You're my savior, all these formalities are out the window now." "All right, Joy." Saint nodded casually, pointing at the 4 gangsters lying in the doorway. "Who are they? Why were they attacking you?" "They seem to be from Hong Kong's Hatchet Gang. I think, this is probably because of the conflict of our businesses. Just recently, our enterprises bought a pier they wanted." "Bought a pier?" The corner of Saint's mouth twitched. She said that so casually, as if she was talking about buying some article from a store. Saint really could not understand the rich. At this time, Lorna and Peter came over from the back of the restaurant. Peter, who was unsettled, said, "Oh, boss, you said that this neighborhood wasn't the best, you weren't kidding, weren't you? And, where are the police? I can't see them. Did you just take down 1, 2, 3, 4 gangsters? Did you handle them all on your own? Oh! Oh God! That man had just vomited a lot of blood. How did you beat him like that? Wait, is this what real Chinese Kung Fu? Aren't you cheating, boss?" "Peter! Shut up!" Saint interrupted Peter's never-ending talk, and then turned to Lorna and said, "Lorna, are you all right?" Indeed, the main reason why Saint did not want the gangsters to ravage inside and cornered them at the door was not just saving Joy. Yes, that was a partial truth, but his main fear was that Lorna could lose her temper, and then go all out wreaking havoc in the store. "I'm fine, boss, just a little scared." Despite the fact that she said that, Saint activated key sense and observed Lorna's key, just to find out it was stable. This made him relieved for now, but he made a decision: he has to find the time to talk this over with her, if he ever wants to stop treating her as a ticking time bomb. "Great! Peter, go and clean the glass off the ground." Hearing Saint, Joy, who stood silently on the side, reacted abruptly, saying, "Mr. Lee, leave the whole matter to me. I'll get this door repaired and everything as good as new." "Thank you, Joy. And, by the way, call me Saint." Saint did not refuse, and then politely pointed out where the police sirens started sounding. "Joy, do me one more favor and find a way to spare me from having to go to the police station." "Of course." Joey nodded proudly and walked out of the store, saying, "Don't worry, leave the police to me. The Meacham name was obviously big amongst police officers in New York. After Joy and the two policemen who came exchanged a few words, the whole incident was defined as legitimate self-defense. Not only that, Saint's name wasn't even mentioned in the report, as the one taking down these four gangsters was just mentioned to be Ms. Meacham's bodyguard. In a short while, 2 ambulances rushed to the scene taking all 4 gangsters on stretchers. The 2 policemen escorted the ambulances to the hospital. With that, the matter finally came to an end. Chapter 15. Breaking into the gang's nest. With the matter complete, Saint walked out of the store and said, "Thank you, Joy. It's the least I can do." Joy shook her head and looked down. "I'm sorry, Saint. Because of me, now you might have the Hatchet Gang behind you. This is not your fault." Saint shrugged, as if the matter was insignificant. "Don't worry about it. To me, they are no big threat to me." "Don't be careless, Saint." Joy's face showed great concern. "I know you are strong. But what if they come at you with a gun next time? Please be careful." Her words immediately got Saint back to earth. He had to humbly accept them, as he knew that his arrogance was still vain while he was at this level. "You're right. I should not be so arrogant. Thank you." Joy grinned and said, "I should get back to Rand Enterprises. We must take measures after such an attack." "Okay." Saint nodded again, and before bidding each other farewell, he exchanged contact information with Joy. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me." "All right. Then, I'll be going. I'll get you a cab." After Joy left, Saint turned back to the store, just to find someone else waiting for him. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. "Colleen. What brings you here? What did you say?" Colleen did not give him room to speak, pointing at Lorna. "What bring me here, you say? What kind of trouble did you get yourself into, Saint? You're making me regret bringing Lorna here for work." "I'm not the one to blame." Saint raised his hands. "Didn't you see Joy leaving? The Hatchet Gang is after her. I was just an innocent bystander." "Hatchet Gang?" Colleen frowned, asking with doubt, "Who's this Joy?" Saint simply explained, "Joy Meacham, co-director of Rand Enterprises, and Danny's childhood friend." "I thought you'd know her." "I'm not that familiar with Danny to know his childhood friends." Colleen rolled her eyes and said, "Saint, I know you're capable, but don't you think that you can't afford to mingle with these wealthy people with all the enemies they have?" "Colleen, I know you're Lorna's sensei, and I understand you concern for her safety." Saint squinted, and midway through talking, his tone changed, "But you're no sensei of mine. You can't come here to teach me how to do things." Seeing him so tough, Colleen couldn't help but be stunned. She looked at him, even more surprised than before, realizing that he was getting further and further from the image she had on her old acquaintance she had known for many years. Seeing her silent, Saint added, "Lorna is a member of Lee's Chinese restaurant. I will do everything to protect her. If you trust me, you should not worry so much. He has just turned 19 years old. Did losing his parents make him mature so quickly?" Colleen looked at him a little puzzled, and then said, "I trust you." Saint nodded and then turned to Lorna, bluntly saying, "Lorna, I have somewhere to go now. There should be people coming to repair the door. You supervise them." "Okay, boss." Lorna nodded hard, although she barely understood what he said. In her mind, only these words echoed, "Lorna is a member of Lee's Chinese restaurant. I will do everything to protect her." Saint realized she looked a little different, but he didn't give the matter much thought. He turned around and called Peter, "Peter, go to the kitchen and bring a few buckets of water to clean the bloodstains in the store." "Oh," Peter reluctantly sighed and walked to the back of the store while muttering, "First actual chore I get in my first actual job is to clean up an actual crime scene. Not a good sign." After Saint gave orders to his employees, he grabbed his mobile phone and walked out. Using Google Maps, he went to a certain address he had in mind after getting a cab. When Joey Meacham spoke about the pier, Saint finally remembered that there was indeed an axe or hatchet gang in the MCU, the Yangtze Ganshi. They were located in Brooklyn. Saint could remember their address for it was pronounced by Colleen in the series, being some of the few things that were pronounced the standard way. After all, with all the Chinese words Danny Rand's actor had to pronounce in the series, his accent wasn't exactly the most authentic. As Saint reached the Yangtze Ganshi headquarters, he directly entered, first demonstrating his force on the guards, and then saying, "I want to see your boss." A moment later, a middle-aged Chinese man appeared in front of him, followed by two familiar faces, the two gangsters who fled his store earlier. "Boss, that's him." The middle-aged man heard that, and he signaled them to keep quiet, then asked them in Chinese, "My name is Hai-Ching Yang. May I ask for yours?" "Of course, you're most welcome." Saint responded to Yang politeness saying, "My name is Saint Li. A second-generation Chinese? Born in the United States." Seeing Saint nodding, Yang continued, "Very good, it's rare to see standard traditional Chinese not forgotten by people your age." Saint made a gesture with his hand, as if wanting to cut the chit-chat. He said, "Boss Yang, I'll cut straight to the chase, I'm here to solve this little problem we have." "Oh!" Yang smiled, and then started laughing out loud. He finally said, "Oh, then you are here to say that it has all been a big misunderstanding, and that we should just laugh it off instead of having a big fight." Saint smiled, and then said with full confidence, "Trust me, Boss Yang, by the time I finish my words, you'll be thanking me for what happened today." Chapter 16. The Injury Reports. "Kid, don't get so arrogant." Yang turned back immediately, making a gesture with his hand. With a threatening wicked voice he said, "When before me, you should be kneeling down for mercy. Now, try again. If I don't like your tone, you won't make it out through that door behind you." A light went on behind the boss, and Saint could see what was hidden in the back, 7 or 8 men in black with semi-automatic rifles. Saint had no idea they were there, they were all pointing their guns at him to the head and chest. He felt uneasy about what was behind him as well. Apparently, other guns were also pointed at him from the back. Being in such an unprecedented life-threatening position, all of Saint's muscles tensed up. He took a deep breath, and calmed himself down, but his body remained tense. However, his mind was clear enough to talk as smoothly and as calmly as before. "Boss Yang, would you please tell them to put their guns down? After listening to what I have to say, if you still feel dissatisfied, it won't be too late for them to riddle me with holes." "Humph!" Yang snorted and waved his arm down, and his men lowered their guns. Arrogantly, he said, "Talk." Saint's first sentence made Yang's face change greatly. "The pier you want, the ones behind Rand Enterprises buying it are the hand. Everyone, leave us alone." With shock upon his face, Yang dismissed his men. He said immediately after, "I am very sorry. I had no idea about your identity. I did not mean to offend you." Saint shook his head and said, "Oh no, Boss Yang, this is a misunderstanding. You don't have to be so nervous. I'm not affiliated with the hand. However, the one who's in command of Rand Enterprises, and Joy's brother, Ward Meacham, is part of Madame Gao's faction." "What?" Yang's eyes bulged sharply, and they were filled with fear. "You mean that buying the pier is Madame Gao's decision?" The old lady, member of the 5 Fingers. If it was any of the other 4 fingers of the hand, Yang wouldn't be so afraid. He could simply flee to China if that was the case. However, if he bothered Madame Gao that has operations in China, whatever path he would take, it would lead to his death. Saint nodded with a smile, "Now you're getting it. You hurt Joy, you provoke Ward, which in turn would mean that you've provoked Madame Gao. Now, I believe this is enough to make you rather happy about my deeds today." "Enough." Yang revealed a smile that looked more like a cry. He extended his hand, "Enough indeed. It's like you said. I should thank you. Thank you for keeping my men from making such a colossal mistake. If something wrong was to happen to Joy, we would get into great trouble. If he knew how much I know, I wonder if he'd thank me for just telling him this." Saint awkwardly shook back his hand saying, "Water under the bridge. As long as what you're saying is true, you don't have to worry about what happened today." Yang actually was almost completely certain that Saint told the truth. After all, and nobody wouldn't know about the hand. He would definitely not know about Madame Gao. "For formality's sake," he said, "I'll be verifying this news, you don't have to stay if you don't want to." Saint was politely sent out of the nest. At this time, he could finally relieve himself. His hidden panic showed as his forehead was covered in sweat, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Getting into the Hatchet Gang's nest is no joke. Saint had already expected that he would have to face armed men as he went into the nest. However, a dozen semi-automatic rifles made him feel more threat than he had ever expected. If he was to slip up one bit, he would have left the place in a bag. That was too closed. Saint calmed himself up again, embarked on the road to go home, it is finally over. Little did Saint know that this was only the beginning. As he got into a cab, the NYPD Policy Chief Office, George Stacy, T/N, Gwen Stacy's dad, looked at the horrifying report of the 4 injuries on his desk, tapping upon it with his finger. After giving the matter some thought, he said to the detective in charge of the case, "Gather all the information concerning this case and report it to the FBI." "FBI," the detective exclaimed, and reluctantly answered him, "This case involved the directors of Rand Enterprises. If we go too deep, it would upset the commissioner." George frowned and said righteously, "Rand Enterprises reducing their donations is something for the commissioner to consider. Our duty is to protect the people, so do your job, detective." "Yes, sir." After watching the detective leave, George sighed and said helplessly, "What in the world is happening to New York? These guys are popping out one after the other. It's like superpower are on sale." He picked up the reports again, and as if talking to the one behind the injuries he said, "If you're like that Jessica Jones or Luke Cage, I might let this go. However, if you dare to become a maniac like that Punisher guy, you'll be like any other criminal." Oblivious to this, Saint walked down from his taxi and looked at the freshly installed glass store door, and couldn't help but feel good. As he walked in, he saw Lorna greeting him, "Boss, you're back." "Yes," he said in a low voice, as he carefully looked at the door, finding that all the floor-to-ceiling window on its sides were also changed. "Lorna, how come all the other glass is also changed?" Lorna showed a surprised face. "Like the store door, they were replaced with bulletproof glass." "Isn't that what you asked them to do?" Chapter 17. Lorna showing her superpower. Bulletproof glass. This was news to Saint. After taking out his phone and searching for bulletproof glass price, he calculated the cost of this renovation, and couldn't help but chuckle. It turned out to be at least over $10,000. "Boss, is there any problem?" Lorna was a little reluctant to speak. After all, Saint assigned her with the responsibility of monitoring the process. She could not help but ask nervously, "Is this glass expensive?" "Yep, quite expensive. Even if it was the cheapest kind, a square meter should cost hundreds of dollars." Saint unconsciously answered, just to see Lorna's jaw drop. He quickly smiled and explained, "Don't worry, these people were sent in by Joy. She's the one who paid for this. I wasn't worrying about having to spend much money, I was just a little surprised by her generosity." After that, Saint looked inside the store and said, "Where are Colleen and Peter?" Lorna sighed and replied, "Sensei returned to the dojo, and Peter went back to school. He said he'll be back in time for the evening shift." "Boss, are we going to open tonight?" Saint nodded. "Yes, we will. And you can rest assured that the guys from lunchtime won't bother us anymore. I went ahead and dealt with them. Hey, can Colleen and tell her that, perhaps she wouldn't feel too compelled to lecture me anymore." "All right, I'll call Sensei in a few moments." Lorna automatically agreed, then became a little reluctant, saying, "Boss, you're not angry with Sensei, aren't you?" Despite what she said, she's not just worried about me, she worries about you too. "Oh, she made me furious." Saint laughed out loud, "Just teasing Lorna, it seems that you hold a lot of respect to Colleen. Sensei is the best person I've ever encountered. And this does not just apply to me. Everyone respects Sensei. For us street orphans, not only does she provide us with tuition fees, she also saves money to help us later. More importantly, she gives us the skills we need to protect ourselves. I know this might sound childish, but to us, she's like an angel." "Angel?" Saint's face changed. It wasn't just Lorna, even Colleen herself had no idea that these orphans she's training will end up joining an evil organization. Colleen had a very kind heart, which made people put down their guard around. This was exactly why she was selected by Bakuto to become a recruiter without her knowing, as people become easy to manipulate once they put down their guard. All that time, she thought she was running a charity dojo funded by her sensei. The Hand. Charity. It sounded like a cruel joke. "Boss." Lorna woke Saint from his daze and asked, "Do you think I'm wrong?" "You have no idea how wrong you are." Saint could never say such words. If Colleen was to know about this, it would shatter her world completely and instantly. He had to hide this for now, despite the fact that she was going to get exposed to the truth sooner or later. Saint was too weak for this to happen now. It would be impossible for him fight, or even flee the hand if they set their eyes on him. He showed a helpless expression and changed the topic. Lorna, if you are okay now, stays in the store for a while. I have something very important to tell you. I'm free. Hearing her agree, Saint immediately locked the restaurant door and pointed at the last table in store. Let's go there and sit and talk. The two sat opposite each other across the table. Saint tried to find a way to start his topic. Your hair, Lorna, how long since you've dyed it black? Its green roots are becoming faintly visible, matching the color of your eyes. Lorna was taken aback and tried to explain. Boss, Saint waved his hand, cutting straight to the chase. I already know you are a mutant, Colleen told me the day she brought you here. Lorna's eyes were filled with shock, her biggest secret was exposed. In a heartbeat, her emotions fluctuated wildly, and she became more and more tense. Slowly, clacking sounds began to ring in the restaurants. Saint turned around, just to see all kinds of metal product trembling violently around Lorna, as if they were to levitate and fly towards Lorna at any time. Lorna. Saint whispered her name, and said very calmly, if you mess up the store, I will not help you clean it up. His tone and bizarre threat took her by surprise. On the table between the two, the swaying knives and forks also stopped shaking. The store regained its quiet quickly. That's it. Great. Saint smiled slightly, and to further ease the tension he said, in fact, I kept this from you just to not get you angry, but the costs of everything your ability breaks would be deducted from your salary. Lorna finally smiled, and reluctantly said, Boss. I wanted to know, are you also a mutant? This kung fu thing you do to the food, it's just a cover-up for your mutation, isn't it? Unfortunately, I'm just an ordinary person. Saint grinned awkwardly, I keep dreaming of having an ability that could, once awakened, grant me so much power instantly. That would be great. But unfortunately, I'm not one. Listening to him, Lorna's eyes rose in surprise. She could definitely feel that Saint was being honest. What are you surprised about? Saint shrugged, did you think I'd be one to discriminate against mutants? Would Colleen tell me the truth if that was the case? That makes sense. Lorna agreed with him, but then said with admiration, but boss, I never expected your heart to be so big, you would take your chances with me losing control. Who said I am not worried? It's terrifying. Every day, I wake up afraid that you'd destroy the whole place. Saint kept those words in his heart, and said with his usual smile, that's because I'm fully confident that I could handle that whenever that happens. Puff. Lorna's heart was moved, but she still didn't allow herself to raise her expectations and retorted, I can't believe that. It's simply impossible. Chapter 18. The magical use of ki. Saint did not argue with Lorna, instead asking her, Lorna, tell me, why do most mutants go out of control when awakening their powers? Lorna had obviously done her homework, and knew a lot about her kind. It's because of how suddenly mutations occur. When the X gene is awakened, the body undergoes massive changes in an instant. It's as if one is returning to his state as a newborn, having to learn how to use a new body. That's correct, and impressive. Saint nodded, but in my opinion, it's really not that complicated of a thing. When awakening the X gene, mutants usually gain a wild increase in ki. With your ki 100 times larger than that of an ordinary human, but with the same ki control as him, how could you be expected to control your ki? Lorna had heard the word ki from Colleen before, but her understanding of it was not that deep. She asked, Boss, I didn't get you. Do you mean you could teach me how to control my mutation through controlling my ki? Saint shook his head, sorry, I can't do that. A mutant's ki is very special, and they have strong personalities. The only path for them is to teach themselves. As Lorna pouted in despair, Saint's tone changed, well, I can teach you ki masking with which you can mask your ki. Mask my ki? So with this ki masking, I could mask my mutant abilities and make myself appear the same as ordinary people. Lorna's eyes shined brightly. That would be its most basic role. As Saint nodded affirmatively, he explained in detail, in the beginning, you'll only be able to completely mask your ki, and this should also keep you from using your mutant ability when using the technique. With time, as you get better with ki control, you'll be able to adjust the degree to which you mask your ki as you like. Why would I adjust the degree of shielding? Shouldn't I just hide my ki completely unless I need to use my powers as a last resort? That's correct, but it's only a temporary solution. Saint explained, In fact, key masking is just a step towards controlling your key. For example, right now, you have the key of 100 people. What key masking will do is shield out the power of 99. You'll have only the energy of 1, becoming weak. But being weak has its benefits, as you know. With time, you'll learn to vary the amount of key you mask, and you'll eventually be able to mask the key of anywhere between 1 and 99. Once you can fine-tune your key use like this, you'd actually be doing key control, and you'll be able to use the appropriate force whenever you want. Lorna listened carefully to Saint. The more she listened, the brighter her eyes went. She immediately said, "Boss, please teach me." "Don't worry, I'll definitely teach you, but on one condition." Saint motioned to Lorna to be a little quiet, and said, "This is important, listen to me carefully." Lorna nodded quickly and serious, "I'm listening, boss." Saint's face became heavy, and his tone turned deep and prestigious. "Key masking is a skill unique to Kame School. I'm making an exception here, but it cannot go beyond you. You cannot teach anyone else without permission. Otherwise, even if I was to chase them to the end of the world, I will kill everyone who steals the teachings of Kame School." As he said the last sentence, Saint's voice was breathy and deep, and his eyes were full of bloodlust. Lorna, who was sitting opposite to him, was shook to her core, and then very seriously promised, "Boss, I swear, I'll never spread out your secret techniques." "Great!" Saint said with his usual tone and a big smile on his face. "Follow me." The two went up to the top floor and walked into the sound-dampened room where Saint practiced. Lorna looked around with amazement in the windowless room. She could only see some family pictures on one wall. Saint sat down on the floor, and pointed to a spot half a meter in front of him. He said to Lorna, "Sit down on your knees here." With the two facing each other, he then said, "To learn key masking, you must first be able to sense your own key. Can you do that?" Lorna gave the matter some thought, and then said with some doubt, "Whenever I use my ability, I get an aura around my hands, looking like the northern lights. I feel that light is the source of my strength. Is that my key?" Because Shank revealed a bit of a dumbfounded expression, he said with a sigh of relief, "Well, kinda. It's just the outward manifestation of your key, not its essence. It's your key that allows you to create that aura, not the aura that drives your key. Do you understand?" "I did not." Saint looked at Lorna, and could not help but sigh. She was a Westerner, without any knowledge of this matter. Expecting her to understand this right off the bat was too naive. He thought about it for a while, and then extended his right hand to her. "Lorna, give me your hand, and let me first make you feel my own key." After a while, just like what happened before with Joy Meacham, Lorna stared at her fingers in shock, saying, This is key." Saint smiled at her and said, "Remember this feeling, and then rely on yourself to perceive your own key. It's like a sixth sense beyond the other five, so don't focus on vision, hearing, smell, touch, or taste. It's something different, something you've just sensed." After a while, Lorna, who had her eyes closed, opened them in frustration. "Boss, I couldn't do it." "It's okay." Saint expected this outcome, and extended his right hand again. "Let's try again." An hour later, Lorna, who had failed 10 times in succession, began to lose confidence in herself. Trying to get some perspective, she asked, "Boss, how long did it take you to sense key?" Chapter 19. Shield Agent. "Well, immediately." Because he had gained all of Gaku's knowledge, Saint immediately felt his own key. He knew that this was the simplest step, but Lorna wasn't getting it done yet. Having said that, Saint could actually only claim that he practiced hard for this, and he fabricated a good faith lie saying, "It took me a long time, Lorna. You are a Westerner, you're not even familiar with the idea, so it's normal that you take a bit long before learning this. Don't allow yourself to feel discouraged." "Okay." Over half an hour passed. "Boss. I feel it. I finally felt it." Lorna jumped up from the floor ecstatically, saying to herself, "This is my key. So massive." Saint secretly wiped the sweat off his forehead. Although he wasn't using much ki for every transfer, 20 of those were enough to practically dry him out of energy. Before reaching this point, he even started doubting Lorna, thinking that she might be perhaps just unable to learn sensing ki. Very well, should familiarize yourself with this feeling. Also, get to know your own ki. Tomorrow, if all goes well, we'll start the next step. Saint left the room saying to Lorna, I'll go prepare the restaurant for the evening shift, and you take your time getting used to this new feeling. Just get down at dinner time to work. Okay, thank you boss. You are welcome. Saint walked out of the quiet room and went down to the first floor. He first prepared the kitchen, then took a meal and opened the new door. At this time, Lorna also walked down the stairs. With a bit of a weird expression, she asked Saint, Boss, you said that my ki is 100 times as strong as that of an average person. Well, using the same unit, how strong is yours? Saint remained silent for a good while, and was very reluctant before he answered, 3 times. He was actually rounding up the number heavily, for his ki was just a bit over twice as much as an ordinary person. Only 3 times. Lorna's face looked as if she understood something. I was thinking I was wrong, when perceiving that your ki is much weaker than mine. Saint uncomfortably pouted and answered, of course it's that low, I'm not a mutant. Lorna laughed and gathered the confidence to say, and here I was thinking you're so extraordinary. And now it turns out you're not an opponent of mine. Ha! Ha! Saint laughed coldly, I'm starting to feel like you don't want to learn ki masking. Ah, boss is too stingy, and can't take joke. Okay, let's stop the nonsense. Start working. There are no costumers yet. The two stared at each other, until Saint silently retreated. After a short while, Peter, who had just left school, hurriedly arrived. As time went by, more and more people arrived, and Saint had to work hard to serve all the costumers until 9 p.m. Next, a calm week went by. With Kung Fu Barbecue, Li's Chinese restaurant remained very popular. Saint was able to make a daily pure profit of over $500. Not the hand, the hatchet gang or the NYPD came in to bother him, and he felt that the storm brought by Joy Meacham's arrival had passed with no consequences. On the morning of the 8th day, someone that Saint never wanted to encounter appeared at the door of his shop. No way! A middle-aged man walked through the door. Saint frowned, saying to himself, what happened? I've been keeping very low-key these days. T/N, yep, magically cooking meat is very low-key XD. This middle-aged man had a black suit on, black hair that was meticulously brushed to the side, and gentle smile on his face. He looked completely harmless. However, Saint knew very well that he was going to be the biggest trouble he had encountered since crossing over to the world of Marvel. Saint quietly sensed his ki, and found that it was at least 1.5 times as much as a regular man. This made him rank high among ordinary humans of this world. This was completely opposite what Saint thought. Hello there. The middle-aged man went straight to Saint, keeping a smile on his face and saying, Mr. Saint Li. Yes, hi. Saint greeted him and said in a low voice, and you are? The middle-aged man reached out to the inside pocket of his suit, pulling out a badge and saying, Phil Coulson, FBI. I'm here to investigate a case. Can I talk to you now? Haha. So, since you're in the USA, you're FBI. If we were abroad, you'd be from the CIA? SHIELD agents, they like their role-playing. Saint sneered and resisted his impulse to vomit saying, of course. Please, take a test. He pointed at the nearest table. Phil Coulson sat down and looked at Saint saying, Mr. Li, 7 days ago, the co-director of Rand Enterprises, Joy Meacham, came to your restaurant. The restaurant was attacked on that day by 6 people, 4 of whole were subdued on the spot. I want to know, who beat them? If I say I don't know, I'd be obstructing justice, won't I? Seeing Phil smile and nod, he helplessly admitted, I did it. Phil Coulson was not surprised at all. It was obvious from his investigation that it should have been Saint. From his briefcase, he took out 4 injury reports. He laid them on the table, saying, there are medical reports on what happened to the attackers. The one with the lightest injuries had 3 broken ribs, and the forensic doctor thought that he was hit by a car running at 60 miles an hour. Of course, you know all too well that it wasn't a car. So please, tell me of the means you've used to subdue them. Saint pouted to the side, and after hearing that long story he said, I used my hands, Kung Fu. Phil Coulson narrowed his eyes, Mr. Li, I have to remind you that lying to me in the process of obtaining evidence constitutes a violation of the federal law. Chapter 20. Coulson and May. Believe what you want, Agent Coulson. Now, if you may, I'm busy, and don't have time to chit-chat. Saint calmly said. Phil did not seem bothered, and he smiled as usual saying, Mr. Li, do you know of aliens or mutants? I know about mutants. Saint felt he had to lie, I haven't heard of aliens existing. Phil nodded and said, a detailed explanation would be too long, but in simple terms, aliens are extraterrestrials, and mutants are human beings who have awakened superpowers through genetic mutations. Once one of the two is located, they would be assessed for their danger level, and depended on that, they might be arrested, imprisoned, monitored, or anything else that would serve to ensure the safety of the people. I get it now. Saint sneered, you think that I might be a mutant? Or an alien? Phil Coulson added obsessively, and then said, Mr. Lee, if you can, please prove to me that your kung fu could achieve the feats I've told you about. Otherwise, I would have to ask you to take a trip with us. Us? Saint turned around unconsciously and said, you're not alone. Phil politely threatened him, I'm very sorry, I failed to tell you. On the other side of the street, there's an entire team of heavily armed personnel. Of course, as long as you cooperate with me Mr. Lee, they will not rush in. Saint remained silent, then he said reluctantly, so if I prove that it's just kung fu, you'll not bother me? Absolutely. Phil nodded, you've protected Joy Meacham in an act of legitimate defense. So far, you have not violated any federal law. As long as you can confirm that you are no alien or mutant, I have no reason to bother you. All right, shake my hand. Phil Coulson looked at Saint's extended arm, and asked hesitantly, Mr. Lee, what do you mean? Saint impatiently explained, I said I used kung fu, and that relies on harnessing my ki. You are not Eastern so you won't understand, and I can hardly explain it to you in words. A much faster way it get you to feel it. I'll be using ki transfer to get you to feel my body's ki through physical contact. Phil hesitated, and finally extended his arm reluctantly. He touched Saint's hand saying, so. Shit. He could help but swear and pull back his arm quickly as if electrocuted, and then he looked straight at his fingers, This is ki. But man, your hand was sweaty. Saint awkwardly wiped his hand, you don't have to be nervous. This is normal, you're using a new sense you've never used before, ki sense. After a while, Phil regained his composure saying, Mr. Lee, if you don't mind, I want to bring a colleague of mine. And what if I do mind? Phil ignored Saint completely, raising his right arm to his earpiece, May, come in. After a short while, an Asian woman wearing a black tight-fitting combat uniform walked in through the door. She didn't look that young, but her face retained its charm. Her figure was slender and athletic, and her curves were very symmetrical. The soft and rigid aspects of her look came together perfectly, to give her a unique aesthetic sense. On the sides of her plump thighs was a pair of semi-automatic pistols. Her eyes were particularly sharp and her gaze was icy, giving a sense of pride. Saint did not have to speculate about her identity. This was Melinda May, a senior SHIELD agent, an experienced soldier, spy, fighter, and driver. She's been a partner of Phil Coulson for a long time. Ha ha! Saint laughed and looked at Phil Coulson, pointing at Melinda, Agent Coulson, if I'm not wrong, I believe this is your heavily armed team that's been waiting outside. Phil did not answer this question. He introduced May, Mr. Lee, this is Special Agent May, a Chinese like you, with knowledge in Kung Fu. Please explain this matter of ki to her. Saint looked at Melinda and asked in Chinese, what do you practice? Wing Chun perhaps? And Beiji Quan? Melinda was taken aback. She had only made a few steps since meeting Saint and he guessed two of her fighting styles. The choice was so detailed, it was too accurate to be a coincidence. She replied in Mandarin, good eye you have there. Indeed, Saint had a great eye on the characters of the series he used to watch. He put his hand forward saying, I'll not explain too much. Ki is a form of like energy. All living beings have it. However, they differ, and some have stronger ki than others. The purpose of martial arts is to harness said ki and use it to its full potential. This way, one could break his own limits. Is the idea clear? You're talking about Neagong, internal skill. Internal strength is just a legend, it does not exist at all. Nope, you just don't know of its existence. Saint once again stretched out his arm, give me your hand. After a few moments, she did exactly this like Phil Coulson did before, staring straight at her fingers and saying, this. Phil Coulson did not understand anything of the conversation between the two, and he asked May, what are you saying? Carlson. Melinda May recovered from the shock, and said dubiously, I can't be completely sure, but what he said is likely to be true. This feeling coincides with ancient tales about this legendary internal energy, and I can't find another explanation. All right. Carlson nodded and turned to Saint, Mr. Lee, we'll believe your version of the story for the time being. However, could you provide us with a blood sample? After all, we don't have evidence that your tale is real. After so much time, I still have to give a blood sample.